For the last 2 years, the media has told us that Donald Trump is racist and that Donald Trump's policies are bad for African Americans. But the problem the media is having is that the longer Trump remains in office, the more evidence we have and the more empirical data we have to review. And as we currently sit today, African American unemployment is at its lowest mark during any time under any president in American history. And it's not just African Americans. The unemployment numbers for white people, African Americans, women, Hispanics are better under Trump than under any president in American history. There are more people working today than any time in American history. And it's not just that people are employed. The average salaries of people have gone up, including non-managers. Non-managerial workers are making 3% more under Trump, which means there's more people employed and they're making more money. And on top of that, Trump has actually cut the number of government workers in the country. There's less government workers under Trump today than when he took office. And of course, government workers, we have to pay their salaries by getting taxed. We have to pay their pensions by getting taxed. But in spite of that, there's actually more overall workers in the country. The jobs are in the private sector and people are making more money. So if Trump is racist, if his policies are racist, why is it that they're empowering African Americans? Well, what has he done? All he's done is what many of us have argued for the longest time, that you don't empower people by taxing them to the point where they could barely live and redistributing that money, keeping them on a permanent state of government dependence. You empower people by trusting in the individual, by getting out of their way, trusting in freedom, and that when free, people will make the best decisions for themselves and their families, and that if you trust in people, they will be successful. And that's all Trump has done. He's cut regulations and he's cut taxes and gotten government out of the way. Take someone who makes $100,000 a year. They have $24,000 in taxes, that's $2,000 a month, and they have $3,000 a month in mortgage payments because they're going to buy a house. And then they have car payments, and they have to buy food, and they have to buy gas. Well, we already established over $5,000 a month. They need health care, and under the Affordable Health Care Act, because all that was a redistribution of wealth from the middle class to people who have less money. So that's a subsidy. So that person making 100 grand would have to pay $1,500 a month in health care to pay for their family. Well, between the health care, between the mortgage, between the taxation, that's $6,500 monthly. That doesn't leave a lot of money in savings, and that's why even among people who make that type of salary, most people in the country have under $10,000 in their savings accounts, at least before Trump came into office. So it would be the illusion of success, but even if you were more successful, 80,000, 100,000, 150,000, you still live paycheck to paycheck. You could afford nicer toys, you could afford a nicer house, you could afford a nicer car, but in the end, you're just stuck in a bigger bird cage. So Trump comes along and says, okay, well, we're going to cut the taxes, we're going to cut the regulations. And because of that, people now have money in savings. But people don't want to work for anyone else. So what they do is they start their own businesses, and maybe they hire someone else. So now they're making more money and someone else is employed who otherwise wouldn't be. So now they both take that money and they're eating out at restaurants and they're buying new shoes. And the result is that the local restaurants, the local shoe salesmen, they have more business, they need more workers, they have to hire more people, they buy more inventory, the place providing the inventory has to hire more people, and all of these people that didn't have jobs that now have jobs themselves are spending money, and it just ripples through society where more and more people have jobs, and because there's more people employed and demand for more workers, people could ask for raises, and that's why you see raises among people, even in non-managerial positions, making 3% more under Trump. This is basic economics, but they lie to us about it. Cutting the taxation just allows people to be empowered. The same thing with cutting the regulations. Just look at the Affordable Health Care Act, right? It was sold as being designed to protect the little man, but the media, the academia, they lie to us about the fundamental relationship between government and corporations. They tell us, oh, we need the government to regulate the corporations to protect the little man. But that's a mischaracterization of the relationship between government and corporation. Government doesn't regulate corporations. Corporations spend billions of dollars buying off politicians. They spend billions of dollars on lobbyists. Why do they do this? They do this so that the politicians appoint regulators, and the regulators come in and they create artificial corporate government monopolies. Regulators don't regulate corporations to protect the little man. Regulators regulate competition out of society to give corporations artificial government monopolies. And this is what happened with the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare. The regulations created such barriers to entry in the field of healthcare, the field of pharmaceuticals, that new companies can't come into the industry and compete. So the existing companies get artificial corporate government monopolies, and once they get a monopoly, they drive up prices. And on top of it, the regulators mandated the individual mandate. So they gave the corporations a monopoly and guaranteed them that through taxation, through force, fraud, and coercion, the government would guarantee, no matter how high the price of healthcare went, that the pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare companies, would receive payment. Well, if you give any corporation a guarantee that they have a monopoly, no competition, and a guarantee that no matter how high prices go, they'll get their money, of course the price of healthcare is going to go up. So Trump comes along, he cuts regulations, he cuts the individual mandate. Now you're not paying $2,000 a month in taxes. Now you're not paying $1,500 a month in healthcare. And voila, just like that, we have people starting their own businesses, we have black unemployment down to nearly 5%, and people making more money. Because Donald Trump understood the lie, that you don't empower people by keeping them in bird cages, by taxing them to the point where no matter how much money they make, they can't get any savings, they can't get ahead in life. You don't empower people by keeping them on permanent government dependency. You empower people by believing in the individual and getting out of the way. And that's why the economy, all people of all colors and creed, are doing better under Trump. Then we see that he pardoned Jack Johnson, a former heavyweight champion who was victim of historical racist injustice. Then we see that he pardoned Dinesh D'Souza, an Indian author who was attacked for political reasons under the Obama administration. By the way, if you want to understand all of this that I'm talking about, read The Big Lie by Dinesh D'Souza. And this week he pardoned Alice Johnson, an African-American woman in her 60s who was sentenced to life in prison for a one-time non-violent drug offense. Just ridiculous. But Trump comes along, the alleged racist, and he pardons all of these people. And on top of that, he may have just signaled that he's considering serious changes to the American drug schedule, which I guess we'll see if that happens, but it's certainly a positive development because the war on drugs is just another failed war on the American people. I'll get into that another time. But he pardons Alice Johnson, and he indicated that he will sign prison reform if the bill comes to his desk. He will sign a bill that creates reform so that people who are in prison can be rehabilitated and can actually find work when they get out of prison so they don't wind up back in prison. Again, I just don't see how that could be bad to anyone, to white people, Hispanic people, or African Americans. So if Trump is so racist, why is it that all his policies continuously empower the people he's allegedly racist against? Why is it that all of his policies empower African Americans? We have been sold these lies, but now we have empirical data. There's nothing wrong with believing the original lie. It's okay to get fooled, but once the data comes along and shows you that you're wrong, you remain the fool if you don't adjust your worldview. Under Barack Obama, we saw what happens with high regulations. Obama regulated society more than any president in American history. Obama attacked society to the point where people had barely any money, and the result was high black unemployment. Trump comes along and he cuts more regulations than anyone else. He cuts more taxes than anyone since Ronald Reagan. And people of all races, colors, and creed are doing fantastic. African Americans are doing fantastic. If your worldview was the opposite of Trump's, it might be time to reevaluate and realize that Trump's not the one trying to hold you down, that the sophist politicians might be. Because between Donald Trump, between the mainstream media, it may be true that one of those entities is racist. But based on the empirical data, if the mainstream media is still trying to sell you the lie that they empower you through high taxation, that they protect you with regulations, and Donald Trump is telling you the truth, backed by empirical data, that cutting regulations and cutting taxations empowers African Americans, then who among them is actually trying to hold you down? And who among them is the true racist?